I think we need to get to a point of actually recognizing and affirming the dignity of all work that people do. They bring the fullness of their humanity, their creativity, their passion and experience to that work. And we should be encouraging young people to think about the jobs they're interested in and the jobs demanded by the labor market, not to have these kind of arbitrary differences of esteem.
How can a set of skills lead you down the path to success? That's what we're setting out to answer on the EdUp Canada podcast. I'm your host, Michael Sangster. Join me as we unpack how leaders around the world have taken training and skills and turned that into a lasting career. Now let's learn together. Welcome to the EdUp Canada podcast. I'm Michael Sangster, and I'm joined today by Garnett Genuis, Member of Parliament for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, and the Conservative Shadow Minister for Employment. Today, we're going to discuss what's happening in Canada's labour market, federal policy, events that are happening in Ottawa, training, and his role within the current Parliament. We'll also explore the role of innovation and employer engagement, other issues that might come up. As my regular listeners know, we tend to wander. And we'll ask them the two questions we ask every one of our guests about a skill they have that's made them successful and a mentor in their life that's had an impact on them. Because we believe in education, mentoring plays such a key role, and why we need to get more people into the system to have those opportunities to be retrained and learn from others. So, Garnett, you want to say a few words, introduce yourself to people?
Well, thank you very much for having me on. I've been a member of Parliament for about 10 years. I've been about 6 months in this role of Shadow Minister for Employment. It was a new area for me to take on. I've done a lot of work on international development, international human rights, and foreign policy. So when our leader, Pierre Poilievre, asked me to take on the employment portfolio, it was a new area for me, but I've really enjoyed working in it. And it connects a number of different strands in my life. I think, as you said in the introduction, mentorship is extremely important. We often take a lot of interns in our office, and I think kind of that development of talent in the political world is something that it's been something I've thought about for a long time. And I've also got 6 kids, so I'm sure with that many children, we're going to have a lot of different careers represented in our family going forward. So mentorship, career development, these are things that I think about outside of the office and in the office, and I've really enjoyed working on the employment portfolio for the last 6 months, and the people I've had an opportunity to meet. It's at a critical time in our country, as we'll get into. We've got very high youth unemployment, and so there's a lot of work to do.
Interesting segue there, because 6 kids, you and I have talked about employment, talked about training, talked about skilled trades. You're in Alberta, where skilled trades are in high demand in the oil patch and other sectors, plus a huge need to build homes. It's interesting. You may have children. You went to London School of Economics. You worked for Prime Minister Harper. Great skills come out of that kind of work, but you may have children that go to a career college and go into skilled trades.
Yes.
Because the world's changing a bit, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sort of interesting to think in the conversations I have about kind of the expectations that I have for my own kids. And I think I really want them to be in a successful financial position so that they can support themselves and their families. Obviously, I love what I do, and that comes through in my conversations with my kids. But also, you're kind of trying to give them a sense of the broader world. And I think it's always difficult as a parent to expose your kids to sort of the full breadth of options, just because there's so much out there. Notwithstanding the flexibility that people have from a career perspective, I do still meet a lot of people that are multi-generations in the same vocation, including in the trades, right? So a lot of people in the trades, they get exposed to it because they're more typically it's their father, their grandfather did it as well, and they passed along that love for that. In my own family, my father is a physician and loved his work as a physician. 3 out of 5 of my siblings are physicians, and so that's not a coincidence. That's what often happens. But I think it's also great for parents to try to expose their kids to the full range of options that are out there, and to help them appreciate that their path may not be the same as their kids. And like one of the really key issues on the skilled trades is exposure in the education system, exposure to that option very early. Yeah, and of course these things aren't mutually exclusive, right? There's a lot of people who they may go the university route and the career college route at different times. My advice to young people really is like the importance of starting early and the importance of having a plan. Like I think some people drift into university in particular because they see it as just kind of the thing that they're supposed to do and the thing that everybody does, and they don't have a specific career in mind or a specific plan. And like university is a great path if you have a plan, but if you don't have a plan, if you don't have a job in mind and you think just any degree is going to connect you to some great opportunity, that's not often the case. And there's a lot of people who go to university who do not find work in their field and end up going to a career college or getting a trade skill afterwards.
We just did an interesting study with Nanos Research, and 80% of the graduates, about 3,000 graduates studied, 80% of them are found work in some either related or somewhat related, directly related or somewhat related to the studying they did within a career college. Those numbers unheard of. So we're really, really proud of that, because that's someone being trained quickly to go work somewhere quickly, which is our average. Our students are in their 30s. They're a little older. They're a little bit different. We always say we're part of a system. Nobody's good at getting it. The only one who's getting it right. Universities aren't the ones, community colleges, career colleges. We're all playing a role getting people retrained. But you talked about earlier about youth unemployment. Obviously, that's an issue you guys are concerned about on the conservative side. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because you're worried about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the youth unemployment issue is downstream from a number of different things. And we've put forward our conservative youth jobs plan that tries to address all of those challenges. The first one in our plan is unleashing the economy. No surprise here, but when you don't have the kind of investment and economic growth that you'd like to see, there are fewer jobs. And with young people, often it's first in, first out, right? It's when businesses are struggling, they're concerned about the future. They're not going to immediately let go their long-term employees. It's going to be the more recent hires they're going to cut back on. And again, businesses that are planning for growth in the future, they're much more likely to take on summer students and things so that they can identify from those who they want to recruit as their long-term employees. But if you're not thinking about expansion, then you're less likely to do that. And so this is a effective of questions about the economy as a whole. And we've put forward various policies to try to address that. Removing barriers to development in the energy sector is part of that. Also, incentives for reinvestment in Canada. We proposed in the last election, no capital gains tax on dollars immediately reinvested in Canada. Incentives like that, I think, are important, as well as just addressing excessive tax burden and regulatory burden that we hear about regularly from businesses. So that's unleashing the economy. The second part of our youth jobs plan is on fixing immigration. I think we have seen intensifying competition for entry-level positions that has resulted from a poorly targeted immigration system. And there's a number of things we need to do to resolve them. One of them is get better on credential recognition, by the way. I think there are a lot of newcomers who come here with skills that could fill specific gaps in the labor market, but those skills aren't recognized and they end up competing for entry-level positions as well, which is a double negative. It contributes to not having people in the skilled categories where they're required, and also having intensifying competition for those entry-level positions. So fixing immigration. But then the third one, I know probably of particular interest to you and your listeners, is fixing training. Having lots of conversations with employers and young people, I hear that there are concerns about skill gaps as well as geography gaps. It's that there are young people unemployed, there are jobs that need to be filled, but employers struggle to find young people who have the skills that are required for those jobs. And also, in some cases, they struggle to find people in the geography where those jobs are available. There are some regions with low unemployment, and there are some regions with very, very high unemployment. So our final 2 points, fixing training and building homes where the jobs are, align with those problems. And in terms of fixing training, a few pieces here. Fundamentally, philosophically, we need to recognize the dignity of all work. I think we've had a problem of profession prejudice for too long in this country, where certain kinds of paths, certain kinds of jobs are held in higher esteem for arbitrary reasons. And some of those jobs that are held in lower esteem might be associated with higher incomes, better hours, better opportunities than those jobs held in higher esteem. So I think we need to get to a point of actually recognizing and affirming the dignity of all work that people do. They bring the fullness of their humanity, their creativity, their passion and experience to that work. And we should be encouraging young people to think about the jobs they're interested in and the jobs demanded by the labor market, not to have these kind of arbitrary differences of esteem. And some of the proposals we put forward for fixing that is offering direct support to high schools for more promoting greater exposure to vocational programs at that level, offering relatively more generous student grants to students pursuing studies in demand fields. Unfortunately, on training, we've seen the Liberals moving in the opposite direction. They're proposing to no longer allow student grants to go to students who attend private for-profit institutions. That was a proposal in the budget. And the effect of that is anyone going to a university program can access student grants, no matter how unrelated that program might be to the needs of the labor market. But anyone going to a private for-profit institution, according to this proposal in the budget, will not be eligible for those grants. And I see that budget measure really as reinforcing rather than moving away from profession prejudice. A lot of students, they're choosing educational institutions based on what career they want to have, right? And there's a lot of areas of study where they're just not available at public institutions. So anyways, that's some of our conservative jobs plan. We could talk a bit about the geography gaps too, if you like, but that gets us to I think the main point, which is the training one.
That's an extensive list of items you're talking about. I want to get into what it's like to be in His Majesty's official opposition in a second, but I want to unpack the student grant issue because we're actually spending a lot of time on that, reaching out to members of parliament now to talk about that. And it is affecting, we've received clarity on it now, it's affecting students who are over a 1-year program. So if it's a 2-year program in a private institution, but it's just targeting us. And the irony is those are mostly regulated programs. Those are nursing. Those are the kind of programs that we need to train people and graduate them and get them to work. And ironically, our colleges are sometimes smaller, more nimble, more remote. You talk about geography, we're better at this stuff in smaller communities. So it's going to have, I believe, the wrong effect from what the government might want. They're looking for savings. We think it's in the wrong area, and we're optimistic that we can work with the government to find a solution. But we're not happy about it, as you know, and we're going to work on that. I'm interested because I think the average listener, there's a lot to unpack there, but you've been around the system for a while, 10 years in Parliament, worked for the Prime Minister. Thank you for that. It is service. I always like to thank MPs. I've made friends with a Bloc MP. You're all good people just trying to serve the nation in your own way. And you might disagree, but there's very little ill will in the House, I find. I worked there in the 80s where it was a little bit friendlier than it is now, but the average person doesn't know your job is actually to be the official opposition. You're there to oppose, aren't you? You're not there to support the government in your seats.
I think in terms of the role of the opposition, it's nuanced. We are there to be part of the, as Burke says, the deliberative assembly of one nation. We are there to explore big ideas and put ideas forward. And in this role, I've tried to be very constructive and not only saying where I think the government is on the wrong track, but also putting forward specific proposals like we did through the Conservative Youth Jobs Plan. Having said that, yes, our system is designed to have an opposition that is able to and that has a responsibility to zero in on where there are problems and to propose solutions to those problems. This whole area of the government moving in the wrong direction on training and moving against career colleges, this is something that it's my job to identify things like that, to go through the budget and find, okay, in this massive document, hundreds and hundreds of pages, what are the things that could be problematic that are buried in this case? I think it's page 217, right? And so you'll recall, I mean, we
called quickly
immediately.
You called the day of the budget was, you were on the phone to me. I was in Vancouver at an event. You were calling to say, what is it? And we didn't know a lot right away, and we've chipped away at finding out exactly what they mean by it. And now we're trying to work with the government and others. But you're right. You called us first before media did.
Yeah, this is our job. And I think you guys as an association, you would have been on it either way. But certainly there are some people whose job isn't related to politics, who are just trying to live their lives and might not know they were affected by this until it had long passed and suddenly they were realizing that they're not eligible for something that they should have been eligible for. So I think this is a good demonstration of of what constructive opposition is. And Patty Haidu comes to committee, and we're able to. She's the minister responsible, and we're able to push her on it and challenge her on it. I didn't get the impression that she was even very aware. Her sort of superficial comment was, we think public dollars should go to public institutions. But then she said we'd be open to maybe granting certain exceptions if someone suggests it. And I said, well, okay, are you considering exceptions? What kind of exceptions? And she goes, well, that would be hypothetical. It's like, okay, well, like, what are we talking about then? So yeah, I think Canadians would appreciate this role of opposition. Doesn't mean there aren't cases where we agree, where we support government legislation, where we work together on certain things. Absolutely. But bringing some light to these problems that probably would otherwise not get noticed in a big way is a key part of my job.
I live in this Ottawa ecosystem, have for a long time. I like to point it out because the average person doesn't understand that it is your role and it is constructive, but it's also constructive on the government of the day to work with the opposition too. And we don't always see that. It is a back and forth that needs to happen. When it does happen, it works well. I struggle with it a bit now. It used to be a little bit more collegial than it is these days, but hopefully those walls will break down. We've broken for Christmas. That helps. Everybody can go back and take a breather and come back at it in February. You're back in the riding now. Give me a little pearl about your riding. What would somebody not know about your part of the world that your people are proud of?
Obviously, I want to say, like, it's a great livable community. Sherwood Park and Fort Saskatchewan and the surrounding kind of rural areas that are part of the riding are just wonderful places to live. Very family oriented suburbs. Lovely place to raise a family. Also, though, from an economic side, when people think about the energy sector in Alberta, oftentimes it's the head offices in Calgary and the extractive part of the energy sector in and around Fort McMurray and other places. But there's a third leg to that stool, and that's the value-added processing that happens in a big way here in what we call the industrial heartland, which is an area that includes the Industrial Heartland Association represents 5 municipalities in the region, 2 of which are in my riding, Strathcona County and Fort Saskatchewan. And this is where a lot of kind of value-added processing, energy-related manufacturing happens. And when people think of oil and gas, they are more likely to think of heating fuel and driving your car and things like that, and less likely to think about the various products that we all use that are manufactured from energy ultimately. So I like to use the example of election signs, because even NDP election signs typically use chloroplast. I know the Green Party has come up with some other system that are more likely to get blown over, but almost everybody in Canadian elections use chloroplast election signs, which are ultimately a petroleum product. So there are so many things in our daily life that involve energy products through a manufacturing process. And a lot of that does happen right here in Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan. So when people think about Canada's energy sector, they should think about the 3 legs of the stool, right? The extraction, the head offices, but also that value-added processing.
You and I have put up a few chloroplast signs over our careers. A few staple guns being used over the years to put a sign into a wood post in the middle of a highway in the wind. You touched on immigration. I want to go back to that because it's a really good segue from what you were talking about the oil and gas sector in Alberta and the workers that are needed. And you just have to get on an airplane in St. John's on a Sunday night or on a Monday night and see how many workers are coming from Newfoundland, Alberta to work. But immigration is an important part of that as well. And we've talked a lot about the international student crisis that went on. We got tagged with that one too. And we were about 4.5% of the international students that year. We weren't the problem. We were spread out across 500 plus institutions in Canada, but we got tagged with that. We actually supported the government in a need to reform. I think that the Conservative Party at times gets tagged a little bit harshly on this issue. You're not opposed to immigration. You just want the government to get it right and make sure we get the workers in that we need. If they're trained here or not, the ones that come here, as you talked about, are re-credentialed to work here, or their credentials are accepted, or we bring people over with credentials that we accept before they land. Am I right?
We had, under Stephen Harper, we had very high levels of immigration, and that was at a time when there was a consensus around that, right? People were happy with how the system was managed in a way that had, compared to peer countries of similar populations, the numbers were high. The numbers have gotten too high under the Liberals, in our view, but also the system has been poorly managed and poorly targeted in various ways. I think your listeners could imagine cases or systems or kinds of programs where newcomers are able to catalyze job growth for Canadians because they're filling specific gaps, or because they're coming and investing, starting new businesses, creating more opportunities for Canadians. Recognizing the contribution that newcomers to Canada can have to fill those gaps and to catalyze opportunity for the country is very important, and that's where we were previously. At the same time, if you have a poorly structured system, you might end up exacerbating competition for entry-level positions. And I think that's really what we've seen under the Liberals. And that's what economists coming to our study on youth unemployment have reported, is that it's not just like this simple overall numbers question. I mean, the numbers are part of it for sure, but it's also a question of, is the system working? Are the credentials of those who come recognized? Is the way the system is structured exacerbating that entry level job competition, or is it leading to more opportunities being created for those entry level positions? So that's what a well targeted system has to look like. But the other point I would make is, we cannot get to the point of presuming that there are certain jobs that will inevitably be done by people who are from outside of the country. There are going to be short-term gaps and needs that we can talk about, but we should think about whether or not we have the infrastructure to train for jobs that are here in Canada. So one simple example I'll give, talking to some restaurant owners, is cooks of specific food types from certain ethnocultural communities. I had a great conversation in the summer with representatives of Chinese restaurant owners in BC. And I think they were thinking in a very good way about, how can we develop training programs for people here in Canada to learn how to do this work. Specialized cooking of food from certain cultural communities, that's an area where in the past we've been more reliant on immigration. But then how do we develop opportunities so that we've got a lot of different kind of restaurants in Canada. We should be thinking about how we can have opportunities here in Canada for people to learn how to cook that food here in Canada, people who are already Canadians and might otherwise be unemployed. And I think this is where, career colleges are so important in being nimble, responding to those demands, working with employers who are saying, we want to be able to train Canadians here. So there's a role for an immigration system that's well targeted, but we want to be able to have an education system that's nimble enough to respond to needs employers have.
And unfortunately, the international student program crushed some communities with the amount of students they brought in. You just had to go to Kitchener-Waterloo and see how many students were brought in by one community college that absolutely destroyed a community. We had high volume of them in British Columbia, and that caused unique pressures. It took the employment ones you're talking about, housing ones, and it made it unpalatable for some too. And unfortunately, the system was not managed well. We actually supported the government when they intervened and started making changes, to the surprise of other organizations, because we believed they were doing the right thing once they finally got there. And we also believe that more power should be given to the provinces in dealing with these plans for the kind of workers and the kind of training they need. The federal government shouldn't be making those big, broad decisions. If Nova Scotia says we need healthcare aides, and we want to dedicate 1,000 of our immigration seats to people who are going to come train in career colleges to become healthcare aides to work in long-term care, they know the local needs. So let's engage in those conversations too, which I think we're seeing a little more of that. So I'm going to pivot here, because we always ask people a couple of questions. Got a unique career because it's almost all politics, that's pretty rare. You think of some, your leader, Perrin Beatty, some people who've worked a lot of their career in politics. What do you think is a skill that's made you successful, or you think that others starting their careers or in their studies at different points would focus on that would help? Because I think we all have different skills. I've always been able to walk into a room and talk to people. Never had a problem with that. It's a skill I've always had. It's benefited me. Not everybody can do that, though. What do you think is something that's made Garnett successful?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I was chatting with my 10-year-old son about this recently.
You're at the age now where you get to engage on things. Isn't that great?
Yeah, and definitely having those conversations about career development. So I did a lot of competitive debating in high school and university. And look, one of the things that I think is a really important skill in debate in politics, it's not the one maybe people are likely to think of, but it's imagination, having an active imagination. And we think about imagination as being sort of for kids who are reading and creating imaginary worlds for themselves and all that. But look, I think imagination is is very practically important in careers in politics and public policy, because what we need to be doing is imagining possible futures and thinking about what we want for our society, what the desirable future is and how we get there. And then also part of competitive debating is imagining how you would approach a question if you were coming from a different side, right? In competitive debate, you kind of are assigned, you're going to argue for this or against this, regardless of your own personal convictions. The personal convictions don't really enter into it. It's a competitive exercise where you're kind of playing with ideas. So the faculty of imagination, perhaps under discussed, but is really important for kind of developing a vision of where you want society to go, and also for thinking about, okay, how are other people going to approach this question? Creative imagination has been important for me in my career, and I would recommend people think about developing that quality, that faculty who are interested in this business.
It's interesting. I've had a few people talk about, this is our 76th episode of this podcast. We have another one we've launched talking about careers in the Navy, and we're on 16, I think, episodes of that. We've been interviewing about the crew of the HMCS St. John's while they were in the Mediterranean. And it's been interesting to hear them talk about their own stories, their own careers, and some of these things align. So talk to me about a mentor in your life. You touched on it earlier, but somebody that changed your path. And it's always interesting because every time we do this call, I think of somebody different. We don't have one, but can you focus in on one mentor that had a big impact on you that you'd want them to know about it? And then we always ask people, do you think they do know they were a mentor to you?
Lots of different people I could identify, but my dad just celebrated his 70th birthday, and we're getting together as a family this weekend. My brother's in town to celebrate that. So I think I'll highlight his role as a mentor in my life, and in lots of different ways, but in terms of career development in a particular sense. So my dad always liked politics. He never worked in politics, but in a sort of capital P sense, but he was always sort of interested in following it. But he was someone who just loved his vocation. He worked as a doctor, had just such a strong sense of his kind of mission in that role. And if you meet him and you see the kind of thoughtfulness and also compassion that he carries with him, if you didn't know what he was and then you heard he was a doctor, you'd say, yeah, that really makes sense. And he also loves to teach, so he's been involved in teaching medical students and things like that. And when you're a little kid, you often say you want to do what your dad did, right? And then I reached a certain point where I realized, okay, natural sciences, medicine, seeing blood, not for me at all. Like no interest in this whatsoever. So we would joke about it and kind of banter about it. But I think what I got from him, it was less the particulars of that career, and it was more just having a dad who loved his work, and not in a way that took him out of the family, but in a way where he would bring those conversations into the family, and he would say like, "Hey, here's some issues that we're thinking about. Here's some things," and so he would spend a ton of time with us as kids, but also a lot of conversation informed by the things he was thinking about and learning professionally. And I think one result of that is that 3 out of 5 of my siblings became doctors. My wife is a doctor. She actually worked with him when she was in medical school before she and I had even met. But also, I think what I carry forward from that is just a love for the work I do, and also a desire to pass that on to my kids and share with my kids the things I like about what I do. Sometimes in Western culture, we have this sense of like, okay, work is the ball and chain. You work in order to free up as much leisure time as you can for other things. That wasn't my dad's mentality. He certainly had a good balance between work and family time, but he got a lot of joy out of the contributions he made through his work. And yeah, I think it's important to find something for young people, to find something that aligns with the needs of the labor market, but that also you can take on as a vocation, something you love. And that can be anything. If it's work that you bring the fullness of your humanity to, your creativity to, your passion to, it's not the substance of the work necessarily, but it's what you bring into that work that can really make it what it is.
It's an interesting connection to it, but last week I had a plumber in the house, and I think he had the exact same drive as your father did about being a doctor. The pride in this gentleman's work to come in the house, fix 2 things that need to be fixed, move on to the next house, move on to the next house. I talked to him for a little bit while he was working, and it was interesting. We got talking about where he got his skilled trades training, and he had that same passion for what he was doing because he knew every day he helped 3 families or 2 families based on how many homes he could get to that day. And it was neat to see. And I really liked your comments. Before we wrap up and I ask you to say last things, I really liked your comment early about the status of the job or the stature of the job. We took great pride in training. We trained 18,000 personal support workers during COVID in Ontario alone through our program that we run. Some of our colleges teach their own different programs. So we believe it was well over 20,000 trained in the province. And a gentleman you will remember, Paul Calandra, stood up in the House of Commons and in the legislature and thanked us and said, I think it was in a speech. He thanked us. He said, you changed the path of the pandemic. You gave us a workforce we needed to give the doctors a break and the nurses a break and the administrators a break because now they had more workforce. So there's a certain pride there too. And I really I want to get back to that and point it out because I didn't circle back earlier. That dignity of the work, that dignity of the job, we need to do more of that. And they're not jobs for newcomers, they're jobs. And they're good jobs. And we can focus on that. So before we sign off, anything you'd like to say?
Well, I just want to underline what you just said. I think it's so important. Imagine the ways that a personal support worker can touch the lives of families. And in my own family, my grandparents, seeing some of the things they went through at the end of their lives and the way that personal support workers touched their lives. Like my encouragement to everyone is just to recognize the dignity of all work and to not have this I just got to get through the day so that I can do something I want, but to recognize the contributions that you make through work. And this is maybe coming back as well to the issue of youth unemployment. I think this is why youth unemployment is important to me, is that sometimes you hear politicians, they talk about unemployment as if it was purely a problem of money for someone. And I don't want to downplay that element of it, right? Like when you're unemployed and you've got financial obligations and you're worried about meeting those financial obligations, that is a huge problem and a huge stress. And that's part of why we need to fight unemployment. But that is not the only problem with unemployment. Unemployment is a problem because people are missing out on the opportunities to experience the other goods that are associated with employment. And, in some future world, if we could, because of technology or government intervention, we could replace all human work with machines and then we'd all get subsidies to stay at home. I don't think that's going to happen, but I also think that if it could happen, that would be a bad thing.
It's not a world I want. I love work.
No, we want a world in which, people can have an appropriate balance between the different aspects of a good life. But part of that good life is finding a vocation that you love and where you are making a contribution. And it could be anything. So we need to push back against those differences of esteem and affirm the value of the work that people do.
The best description I've heard about the balance that we need to get to is from General Hillier, who said when he took over the leadership of the Canadian military, or when he joined the military, the life-work balance was, if we wanted you to have a family, we would have put one in your kit bag. But by the time he left, he felt it was important that the military be supporting the spouses and the children and doing other things. And we're doing some work with some of your colleagues as well on those files about ways that we think we can do better work around that file. So I just want to say thank you for your service. I'd love to sit down at some point again soon and talk about your time with Prime Minister Harper, because those jobs are great, great jobs. I had an opportunity, one of those early in my career, and you do nothing but learn. But there's nothing sexy about headed to the airport on Sunday night to take another flight back to Ottawa, to trudge into your condo or your hotel room and spend a week in Ottawa and go to committee and then cover someone's committee and go to the question period. It's a grind, and I know I watch it. So I appreciate your service. I appreciate everybody in the House of Commons who goes through that, especially the Westerners. It's a grind. There's not a lot of direct flights. It's a tough go sometimes. So thank you for that. And I just want to wish you, before we sign off, best of the holiday season. This will be our last episode before we walk into Christmas a couple of days later. But I'm looking forward to working closer with you and your colleagues in the new year, and appreciate you taking the time today, Garnett.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your work, and Merry Christmas to all who celebrate, and best wishes for the holidays to everyone in the season ahead.
With that, we'll sign off for this week's edition of the Ed Up Canada podcast, and we'll be back with new episodes in the new year. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Ed Up Canada podcast. We release new episodes regularly, so make sure you hit that subscribe button so you know when they are officially out. If you love this episode, please please leave a 4 or 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts so that others can also discover how a set of skills can lead to success. Thanks for learning with us.